The psoas muscles are part of the fire circuit, which relates to the uterus and prostate. So just feeling this opening and closing of the psoas muscle automatically will bring people into the fire energy of the uterus, which we're going to work with much more strongly today. In the last one we were much more just working with this movement of the cranium, of the pelvis, matching each other, and we went through birth like that. But I really want to actually include this time the whole contractions in the uterus, the whole opening of the cervix, the different energy in the uterus to the energy in the vagina, and how that whole area of birth works. And this can bring a very profound experience. It brings a lot of reality, or it did for me anyway, when I started working with that. So let's just carry on. I think I'm actually covering this quite quickly, so I was thinking I had to rush, but I think we're going to be fine. So the baby's head, or the skull, comes down into the pelvis, and to start off with, the face will be turned slightly to one side here, but then as you get strongly into birth, the face turns into the sacrum, so the back of the head is against the inside of the pubic arch there, and then the face is coming down the sacrum, and then the back of the head is it's so hard to do this because my screen is mirror image anyway, so I get a bit lost. The back of the head is coming out through here you're facing backwards in a way when you're crowning there. So let's look. So here we have, see this balloon? It's quite big actually, I have to sit back. That's your uterus. The abdomen, when you breathe in, it feels like it's just expanding in all directions. What is causing that expansion is the diaphragm's dropping and it's pulling towards the pelvic floor. So as these two pull together, that is what's causing the expansion. As the diaphragm rises and these two separating, that is what's causing the narrowing. So it feels like an expansion, but it's caused by a contraction. The initial potency or movement that is causing the expansion is a contraction, as with the breath all the way through the body, all the way through the bones. Feels like an expansion, is an expansion, but generally outside of our awareness there's a contraction that is causing that expansion. And in birth we kind of have to really become in contact with the contraction, because that's what's happening. You're getting contractions through the uterus, which is in the abdomen and the same shape in a way, or similar shape, and the same as the abdomen has got the diaphragm on top. You get breathing in, or contraction, relaxation, contraction. So the uterus is shortening top to bottom, and the baby won't just fly out, so there's a certain amount of expansion. So that's a contraction, that's between the contractions, which are the same as the breath. It's like an in-breath, breathing in, breathing out. Now, here we have, can you see that? That's two balloons inside each other. The outside one is the abdomen. It would be a much bigger space and there would be organs in it. And inside it is the uterus. So in the same way, you can affect, the same way as the uterus is shortening and widening, you can align that with your breath. So they're both breathing in, breathing out. So you can aid the birth by breathing with your diaphragm, breathing in. And not only is the movement coming down and giving the uterus a downward pressure, but the pressure, whole pressure is expanding around as that is happening, just to help with the birth. So because we're using the breath all the way through, that's all we're going to be doing. We will include the contractions, we can't help but feel them in this, but our whole emphasis is breathing in, breathing out. Now in real birth, and now I'm not saying it's correct to do this in real birth, I don't know. All I know is that when people use, or women, mothers use holographic breathing in birth, they get little to no pain. So I haven't taught women this particular dynamic in birth, but I've always said, you know, use your diaphragm a lot. So you can see how those two mirror each other, breathing in, breathing out. And we'll be using that to help our own descent through birth. And we have to, because the two stages of birth just happen naturally, because I didn't really know exactly how they joined together, and I didn't know there was a space between them. But in the last webinar, we went down and then there was this long pause where nothing was happening, and then we dropped into the second stage of birth, where I changed the way we were breathing. So I've gone into that in more, we're going into that in more detail. We're going to very much be working with what happens in the first stage of birth, first of all, and then the second stage. Okay, so there we have a uterus with a baby in it. Now, can you, again, this is mirror image for me, so it's not connecting to the pelvic floor. As this is contracting, it's not pushing the baby out through the pelvic floor. It's just opening the cervix here for the baby's head to move from the uterus and into the birth canal or the vagina. Again, I can't see it because it's mirror image and too small. So in a way there's two births or two crownings. First of all, the uterus crowns and the baby's head comes down into the birth canal, and then the pelvic floor or the vulva crowns. So you get two crowns and two births in a way. The uterus gives birth to the vagina, and then you get the crowning and birth through the pelvic floor. So you can think of it definitely as two crownings, but also you can kind of think of it as two births. Now, in that first stage, when the baby is moving down through the cervix, you don't really want to be trying to push the baby out. That is just opening and opening to a stage. What you have is, if I'm the baby, and here, to start off with, the cervix is quite thick like this, and what happens is quite narrow and quite thick, and to start off with, it starts coming through, and the whole I'm going to come a bit close, the whole stays the same width, but it narrows. So rather than being vertical like this, it splays out around the head of the baby. And then, now to start off with, this is a horizontal here. When it's spread out and narrowed, this is a horizontal diaphragm. And then through the contractions, what's happening is breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. And it comes right around to here. Now, if you rest in that point, it can't close up again because the baby's head's in the way. And that becomes a balance point. That is the end of the first part of labor, when the cervix comes to a balance point. Now, this is my interpretation of it. All it really says in most of the things is at 10 centimeters dilation. That is the end of the first part. But when you look at the pictures, which are all slightly different, actually the circumference, if I just used a bit of geometry, and 10 centimeters is actually works out as the same circumference as the baby's head. So what's happened is that the cervix has come, for us, the change between first and second is, for us as a mother, is when the cervix has come to its fullest dilation. So it's spread from, first of all, fat to thin, and then spreads around, so it just gets a thinner and thinner membrane because it's covering much a wider area. And this top bit of my fingers would be the hole and the 10 centimeters. But then further on down, this will be the join to the top of the vagina, and still the body of the cervix goes further, so it covers this whole area. But it can't contract in anymore because it's pushing directly into the sides of the cranium, and it has integrated with the vagina. It's from being a transverse membrane, it's changed to a vertical membrane, and it's aligned with the vagina. And then as you move on from that, the energies change. You move from the fire energy of the uterus to more the blue energies and much more grounded energies of the vagina. So the energies change. It becomes a much more physical thing. And naturally, last time, we changed from this transverse movement in the face and cranium and in the pelvis to the vertical motion of the breath, which is through the spine, but it's a whole body. So there's this shortening on the in-breath, which in the diaphragm dropping and the uterus coming down, contracting, so you get that movement. That is all connected into this whole movement from the top of the head to the pelvic floor. Breathing in, everything expands. Breathing out, everything lengthens, and this all plays into birth. Now, just trying to think. I think that is it. I think that is it. I spoke to the channels before we started because I know people find, especially for the new people, can find this shortening and expanding a bit foreign to how they experience the breath. And I kind of asked the question, said, you know, how to properly deal with this so that everyone feels honoured in their own experience. And also I can teach how I experience it for myself and kind of what makes sense for myself. And when I asked, it, energies just drove through my brain, just simply just poured through and out through the top of my head. And it is a very physical movement, this shortening, because you are connecting to a strong physical shortening to produce the expansion. But that also happens through the brain, all the connective tissue in the brain shortening top to bottom to to cause an expansion to the sides, lengthening top to bottom for a narrowing. So we're going to make sure as we're being born to include this activation of the brain. And that is what happens in that space between phase 1 and phase 2 of labour. Once the cervix gets to here, now I didn't see this in any books or any videos, it's just we had a birth lady on the last webinar, and afterwards when I said I don't know what happened, but we just stopped there in the middle, she said that is what happens in birth. When you get to the end of the first section and the cervix has dilated or opened to its full extent, everything stops and there's a change of hormones from endorphin based to adrenaline based, and this gives a euphoric feeling. Now I did feel that stillness and euphoria, but what also happened for me was in that rest and deeply quiet meditative space was it activated the Kundalini. There's a huge amount of energy moving through the spine, but what it was doing was connecting. This is the same for men and women. Even though men don't have a vulva, you can feel the sensation in that area. It was connecting the pelvic floor and the vulva to the top and back of the head, which is the next, it's the second stage in birth. The back of the baby's head is descending through the mother's vulva or pelvic floor. So in a way, it's connecting those two parts of yourself to make that connection between the mother and baby. And with the contractions pushing down through the, well, now it's the whole birth canal. The uterus has turned in, it's become part of the vagina. As the cervix opens, basically it becomes part of the vagina. The head comes down through the, see, this is the second birth, this is the first crowning and first birth, and then the head comes up higher and meets the pelvic floor and the vulva, and you get the second crowning and second birth. So it's changing the energies from the first birth, which is inside, to the second birth, which is connecting the top of the head to the vulva. So we're going to sit into that space and really let all of those energies align in that place between the two births. And I can feel, you know, the last time we were working with the bones, and I just didn't seem a lot of energy. I have to tell people about it, but when I was talking about, but I can really feel the energy when I'm talking about the cervix and these two areas and the energies of it. It's going to be, normally we have some anatomy, one meditation, more anatomy, a second meditation. The way that this webinar runs is a lot of anatomy, then the meditation is really long, and this is going to be a longer meditation because we're really going to spend time to sit into that very transcendental space between the two births or the two stages of birth, really to connect to those energies and really sit into it. Is a balance point because the cervix is spread out, and then here, anywhere here at the end of the in-breath or the end of the contraction, it will just close a bit. So breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in. But here it can't. anymore. It's stuck. And if you go further, it's actually narrowing a little bit again because it's coming down to the neck. So this is, it's come to the widest point, and there's this real balance point between the two energies of the uterus and the vagina, and physically a balance point. And because it's sitting at the widest point of the cranium. Also, it's sitting right into, you've got a diaphragm, the top of the eyes that runs straight through the tentorium, which splits the brain. You've also got a dividing of your whole brain straight through there, and that is probably sitting almost perfectly into this rim around between the top and inside of the pelvis there. My guess is that's going to be pretty well on that rim. So you end up in this very significant lateral diaphragm in the cervix, in the brain, in the pelvis. They all balance and come together. And a still point between moving between two sections and birth. And it's come to its widest point. From as soon as you go past that, it's naturally coming back in slightly, because you know there is the whole coming down to your cervix, but there's kind of a space here for it to relax into. So that's a strong balance point, and we will spend time really sinking into that. Now, yeah, the baby's head is squished as it goes through birth. The bottom part of the uterus is relaxed. The muscles don't tighten all around the uterus. The bottom section where the baby's head is relaxed, allowing it to be soft around the face, and then the vagina isn't tightening, that because the muscles are running the other way, so that can just expand. But fitting through the pelvis, what happens is the chin drops in and it presents the back of the head, which is a bit more pointy, and it's coming out backwards through the vulva here. The face is into the sacrum, which is kind of rounded, but all the bones and plates of the cranium, they're all, quite a lot of them, especially through the whole cranium, they're all separate. They just have cartilage between the bones, and then that all gets squished through birth, and then through breastfeeding and breathing, that opens up into a balanced cranium afterwards. And it's quite important. The uterus is escaping. Hang on, there we go, I've got it. This bottom part of, so the muscles are tightening through all this part, but this part is quite relaxed where the baby's face is, and then as it comes through the vagina, then that is relaxed for the baby's head. So it's relaxed around there. But what that means, you see, also what that means is that it's not like there are muscles. So in the uterus, it can just squeeze through the contractions. It can just keep squeezing, relaxing, squeezing, relaxing, squeezing, until the baby's head is coming out and then coming into the vagina. But there's no muscular connection between the uterus and the pelvic floor other than the vagina, which is relaxed to allow the head. So as this squeezes, it's pushing the baby's head into the vagina, and then in one way it's pushing the baby's head towards the vulva for it to go out, but in one way it's pushing down and squeezing the baby out, but in the same way it's causing the same pressure to push itself away. So as this squeezes here, it's pushing on that, but the same pressure is pushing it away. So with the first stage, it can just squeeze and squeeze without needing a pressure here to get the baby in the first stage of birth out into the birth canal. That can all happen from within the uterus. But in the second stage, where the baby's head is here, this squeezes and the baby comes out, but it pushes itself away. It has to have a force here. So that is why in the second stage of birth, the mothers have to push as well, because this is just pushing, but it will just push itself away each time. So it needs to be pushed and be pressing the baby's head out. And now see this bottom bit of the uterus is now the vagina. It's the uterus and the vagina, and here's the pelvic floor. So as the uterus is pushing the baby into the pelvic floor, it's pushing itself away, but then with the diaphragm it sits behind it, so it can squeeze the baby out and push it out through the pelvic floor. Can people see that? Wave your hands if you kind of understand what I'm saying. So it can't do it on its own, because if it just squeezes the baby, it will push the red balloon out to the back of the white balloon. But if this is pushing in at the same time, then it's like if you're pushing a van and you're upright, if you push the van, you'll just push away. But if you've got your feet bracing you, you can push behind the van. So the uterus needs something stable behind it so it can push the baby out through the uterus, the vulva and the pelvic floor. And what we're using in this is the diaphragm, and we're aligning it with the breath, rather than in birth where it's much more breathe out and then you're pushing in from the side with the stomach muscles. Wave your hands if I'm making sense. Great. All right. Brilliant. Brilliant. You'll probably feel it more as we're doing it. Also, here's a clitoris. It's too big. It's a couple of centimeters too big, but it fits in to the front of the pubic arch like that, and the baby is coming through here. So the same nerves that are causing the nice feelings in the clitoris are also engaged in birth. The same nerve that causes pain in birth can cause pleasure in sex. And if this is done with the breath and in a relaxed way, then all of those nerves can be causing a pleasurable feeling rather than a painful thing. All right, so there was an awful lot in that, so I hope I didn't leave people behind there. It was very interesting when we were born. They started lighting fireworks round here like mad. There's just fireworks going off all over the place. Wave your... Now I know it was a complicated, so it may have been hard for some people. I know it was a complicated thing because I was trying to include so many dynamics. Wave your hand if you managed to follow along. Everyone to one. Yeah, everyone. Great. Especially for the new people, that shortening and widening is not an easy dynamic. It really is not, and it takes people a long time to get used to that. So it really is worth watching the recordings and going over this a few times, and it will be different every time. It will start working with something else, so it's not like you're doing the same thing. And it's not, even though it will clear stuff from your physical birth, we're not really working with this lifetime's memory of our birth. We're working with the intrinsic original matrix of birth. And as we go through that, you clear stuff each time, and that will break up the karma of this lifetime's birth and all of the births through the female lineage, as you just keep. So in a way, you may feel it breaking away, but if you want to go in and visit those memories, it's fine. But in a way, each time you go through it as an intrinsic birth, it just brings you into those energies of that truly organic, orgasmic union. You can't really get much of a deeper union than mother and birth, mother and baby in birth. You know, that is a dichotomy where they both fit together exactly and are within us, and they're often seen as separate, but when you bring them together, they melt and merge and heal each other perfectly on all levels. These fireworks are just going off all around at the minute. Wave your hands if you enjoyed yourself. Brilliant, 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 brilliant. Wave your hands if you found the shortening and lengthening kind of awkward or difficult. Okay, 1. That's not bad. Now, if you did find that difficult, because I know some really good practitioners find that difficult, and I'm not even saying it's correct, it just is in my experience, and it fits perfectly with birth, because that is what's happening to the baby. So explore that in your own way, and don't just think, oh, Martin's right. I'm just someone who discovered a new way of breathing for myself and noticed how it feels inside, and then teaching that. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to feel the same thing when they do it. Absolutely, 100%. And I think that the lady who, you know, this happened in the last webinar. I didn't know anything about it. It just went all quiet halfway through. And I'm thinking, well, what's that? Is it all over? And then after 5 minutes or so, it kicked back in again. And then the lady said afterwards, no, there's a gap between the two things. And she said within birth, normally people just rush through that. They don't stay with that gap. And because they think, oh, we've got to give birth, we've got to give birth. So they just carry on. And I've watched all of these videos and read different things to get the anatomy for this one. And I never saw that mentioned once, except in one kind of doctor's thing where they said, and when you come into the second phase, there may be a lulling for a bit. But I think that space is missed in normal birth. And that space, I think, is a complete and utter activation of all sorts of stuff. And I think it's important for us to wait there, to allow all of, even though it's a bit late, to allow all of those activations to happen. Because I think in birth it is just rushed through. Yeah, that's my experience of it as well, that you allow that space and then it just kicks in. If you rush through that space, you can't really get into it. You wait and then it comes on its own. But the pituitary gland is exactly back, and it's in this diaphragm through that whole central, so the whole thalamus area, the pituitary gland, the pineal gland, it's all in that line where the cervix is around, and that whole balance point, I think, is just part of that whole activation that happens in that silence. So absolutely. I'll tell you what I would like. I'm going to carry on doing these every month. And, you know, at the minute I'm just teaching it, but when a lot of women or just women who were learning privately with me started using holographic breathing for their births, and it turned out they feel almost no pain. When you do holographic breathing with birth, you feel almost no pain, and not one of them had any complications. Nobody needed any painkillers or this or that or C-section or anything. So this is fantastic for our own growth, but if you know a doulas, or you know midwives, or you know people who might want to use this in birth, please let them know about this, because I think this will become a founding central part of holographic breathing, because it so much fits with that original experience of birth. It just melds into it exactly. And you know, I'm not going to be here forever. I don't know how this, I'm 63 now, so I'm not going to be around forever. So I don't know yet how this expands on from me. But it would be nice having you know, it wasn't as in depth as this. It was just going down through your own pelvis, being born, come out and breastfeeding at the beginning. But all the mothers said that was, especially the first time mothers, because they could do a birth before they actually gave birth. They found it so empowering to do that before birth. And also women can clear their karma of birth before actually passing all of that on to their child through birth. So it would be nice if this started expanding out, and that doulas or midwives who were interested in growth. I can understand mothers and the doulas and midwives who aren't interested in meditation wouldn't want to come near this, but I'm sure there's a whole area of women and mothers wanting to give birth that could find this really valuable. So if you know a doulas or midwives who may be interested in this, you know, please invite them. They would have to learn the holographic breathing first. They'd have to come to a free webinar to learn the holographic breathing first.